sizameni ukwenza ngokuhle sisaziphilela lo mhlaba. Make sizameni ukwenza ngokuhle sisaziphilela lo mhlaba.
Okay, everyone take their seats. We're about to begin the proceedings, God willing. So, no?
God willing.
Are you okay?
We're going to begin proceedings.
Okay. Willing, whatever it is. Okay. I start by praising God, the compassionate, the merciful. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon the whole gathering. Marhaba, welcome, and thank you all very much for attending this, what I hope will be a seminal debate between our two respected speakers on the left and the right. That's what it's all about. It's about a debate, and it's about us coming together and being, being true to each other. That's effectively what it's all about, right? Yeah? You're in for that? You in for that, man? Good. That's great. Tonight's challenging debate, okay, entitled Islam or Atheism, okay, which makes more sense, is not happening in a vacuum, quantum, no, or otherwise. It's taking place within the context of a world full of human beings looking for answers, in a world seemingly full of Western promise, a world full of information fueled by the IT age. However, IT and we seem to have failed to adequately answer the most fundamental of questions about life, our existence itself, which is, of course, the main core area that we're going to be addressing tonight in this auditorium in London here tonight. I remember, spending a large part of my life asking myself, why am I here? Who created me? Do I have a purpose? Can we be certain about any of these, these questions? And once, I asked a bishop, what's the purpose of life? And he said to me, go and do a theology degree. Right, I'm not telling you to go and do a theology degree. I'm asking you to sit here in a debate for 2 hours with my two honorable guests over here.
Was asking a bishop.
Yeah, well, I'll ask you later. Well, of course. He didn't know the answer, by the way. Right. That's another issue. But what, of course, we can do to inform our decisions about this debate tonight is to use our reasoning, to use our minds, to use our intellect, and really for us to have an open mindset. Muslim, non-Muslim, Christian, whatever you are, whatever you believe in, we should have an open mindset and really go at this with sincerity. That's really, I'm just asking I'm asking myself first and foremost, right? Because that's tough being an ex-Irish Catholic. Yes, yeah.
I didn't think the Catholic Church allowed divorce.
Oh, well, that's another story. This evening, two major belief systems, if you like, lay claim to the truth of going head to head. No matter which side of the fence that you tend to reside on, okay, by the end of the night, that you will be better informed about atheism and about Islam. Hopefully the world perspectives, the world view of Islam and atheism. That's what it's really all about. Tonight, how's it going to hang? Right. Well, we're going to have 25 minutes allotted for both speakers, although I'm told that that's going to change as well. Yeah. Okay? And then followed by a further 10 minutes of, coming back, and then another 3 minutes of coming back, although that might change, Professor, right? And after that, there will be, crossfire, and there's going to be no heavy arms to be utilized in this section, both of you, okay? Although I understand the tongue is a lot more vicious than nuclear weapons. But what we're effectively saying after that is that you lovely people will get the opportunity to ask questions, make observations, hopefully on the topics, right? On the topic that we're talking about. And then there'll be 2 minutes closing remarks, a little presentation after that, and we'll all go home, and we've got to be out of here by 10 o'clock. I would urge the audience not to heckle the speakers, to be polite at all times, okay? And, to listen to each other afterwards as well. We don't want any blood or any fights, okay? And I'm sure that you guys, you understand why I'm saying that. So today, our first speaker, okay? Has this been agreed upon?
No, I was told.
Okay, good, okay. Wait, you want to go first?
I don't care.
Will be our brother, you say brother, he's a brother in humanity. You're my brother in humanity. He's my brother in humanity and in the faith of Islam. Okay. Okay, fine. It means God is great. Yeah. Okay. So, Wحمزة Andreas Dorsis, of course, he's actually Greek, not Pakistani. Please, he in fact is, you can see he's a little bit Pakistani, but anyway. He's a student of Islamic thought, a lecturer, a researcher for the Islamic Education Research Academy. And without further ado, I will call upon him to give his piece.
إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. To proceed, respected Professor Karaus, guests, brothers and sisters, friends, relatives, I greet you with the warmest Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Which basically means, may the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. Today's question, Islam or atheism, which makes more sense? I would argue that if we use our reason, our rational faculties, we will definitely come to the conclusion that Islam makes more sense. And I'm going to use 2 simple arguments to verify that claim. Argument number 1, Islam makes sense of the origins of the universe. Argument number 2, Islam makes sense of the nature of the Quranic discourse. So let me go straight to the first argument, that Islam makes sense of the origins of the universe. Now, we all have had the same type of questions, well, most of us anyway. Why does the universe exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? And in response to that question, the grandfather of neo-atheism, Bertrand Russell, said, the universe is just there, and that's all. It's a brute fact. Even in Islamic history, as early as the 8th century, we had philosophical naturalists known as the Dahriya. They held similar views. Now, the implications of these historical opinions is that the universe is eternal. And if the universe is eternal, it implies there is an infinite past. But the question is, can we have an infinite past? Does the infinite make sense in the real world? Now, the assertion that the universe has an infinite past is absolutely irrational. This is because the quantifiable infinite cannot exist in the real world, something our beloved Professor Karaus has also suggested in his book, A Universe from Nothing, on page 71. He says clearly, the energy of empty space, or anything else for that matter, cannot physically be infinite. So we have to figure out a way to do the calculation to get a finite answer. Now, to highlight why the infinity or the infinite doesn't exist, take the following examples into consideration. Imagine we have, for example, an infinite number of Professor Karaus's in this room. And if I were to take 5 Professor Karaus's away, how many do we have left? Well, some mathematicians may say, well, we still have an infinite number of Professor Karaus's. Logicians will say, we have infinity minus 5. But what stops me practically removing 5 Professor Karaus's away from this room? Nothing. And if I do, there should be less than infinite, but there isn't, therefore it leads to absurdities and contradictions. Take this other example into consideration. The distance between myself and Professor Karaus. We can potentially split this distance into infinite parts, but I can actually traverse the finite distance, which shows, as Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, said, that the infinite is potential, never actualized. And in light of this, mathematicians Kasman and Newman said, the infinite certainly does not exist in the same sense that we say there are fish in the sea. And this leads to our deductive argument. Now, for those who don't know, a deductive argument is a conclusion that necessarily follows from its premises. And to deny a valid and sound deductive argument is equivalent of denying reality. So listen to the deductive argument. Number one, an actual infinite cannot exist. Number two, an infinite history of past events is an actual infinite. Therefore, an infinite history of past events cannot exist. Therefore, the universe is finite. Therefore, it had a beginning. Now, this is a deductive argument. But we also have complementary evidence, which I call astrophysical evidence. And I'm not claiming to be a physicist. We have an established, acclaimed academic amongst us, so he could tell us the rest of the story. But what have cosmologists said? They have said, for example, Alexander Vilenkin, in his book, Many Worlds in One, which I believe is a friend of Professor Karaus, he says, with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. And just to note, even Professor Karaus in his book affirms a beginning to the universe. Interestingly, in Islamic thought, this has been discussed at length, and there is a unanimous conclusion that the universe is eternal. It began in the finite past, as the polymath, theologian, Ibn Taymiyyah wrote in the 14th century in his book, As-Safadiyya, so whatever is besides God, it is all makhluk, all created, originated, coming to be after not existing, preceding by its own existence. Now, since we have shown that the universe must have a beginning, there are 4 logical explanations for how the universe began to exist. Number 1, it was created via nothing. Number 2, it created itself. Number 3, it was created by something else that was created. And number 4, it was created by something uncreated. So let's discuss these together. Could the universe be created via nothing? Well, first and foremost, what do we mean by nothing? By nothing we mean the absence of something, and in this case, the absence of the universe. Now, why does our definition make sense? This is because we have deductively argued that the universe began, and therefore it was once not there. There was an absence of the universe. This is undeniable due to the deductive nature of the argument. So based on our definition, I think we can conclude that the universe coming into being or existence via nothing is impossible on logical, rational, and I would even argue empirical grounds. You could discuss this mathematically, for example. What is 0 plus 0 plus 0? It's never going to be 3. It's 0. Therefore, the universe could not have come into existence via nothing. As P.J. Zwart in his publication About Time explains, if there is anything we can find inconceivable, it is that something could arise from nothing. Let's go to the next option. Could the universe create itself? Well, this implies that the universe was in existence and not in existence at the same time, which is an impossibility. Also, there's a crude example for you to picture in your mind. Ask yourself the question, can your mother give birth to herself? Obviously not. So we know self-creation is an impossibility. So the next option is, could the universe be created by something created? Well, I would argue as an ultimate explanation for how the universe began, this is illogical and irrational. The universe could not be as a result of another universe, for example, or something else that was created because of the absurdity of an infinite regress. Imagine this universe, universe 1, being as a result of another universe, universe 2, and universe 2 being as a result of another universe, universe 3, and this went on ad infinitum, we would never have the universe today. Hence, the Islamic philosopher and thinker, Dr. Jafar Idris, summarizes this point. He says, there would be no series of actual causes, but only a series of non-existence. The fact, however, is that there are existence around us. Therefore, the ultimate cause must be something other than temporal causes. So I would argue that the final possible explanation, which is the universe was created by something uncreated, is the most rational explanation. And the philosopher Abraham Varghese, in the appendix to Professor Anthony Fleur's book, There Is a God, explains this conclusion in a simple but forceful way. He writes, now, clearly, theists and atheists can agree on one thing. If anything exists at all, there must be something preceding it that always existed. How did this eternally existing reality come to be? The answer is that it never came to be. It always existed. Take your pick. the God or the universe. Something always existed. And we've argued deductively that the universe began, therefore it couldn't have always existed. Now, this doesn't mean God exists. It doesn't mean Allah, Buddha, Jesus, Yahweh exists. Of course not. That's a leap of faith. We leave that to the atheists. The point I'm trying to make here is that if we continue with our rational argumentation, using our aql meaning intellect in the Arabic language, as the Quranic discourse says, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, do you not use your brains? If we continue using our brains, our mind, we will conclude something quite profound. Number one, that this uncreated creator must be eternal by definition because he's uncreated. Number two, he must be transcendent. As Ibn Taymiyyah, the 14th century philosopher and theologian, said, he must be distinct and disjoint from the universe. For example, if I were to create this lectern, do I become the lectern? No. Number three, this uncreated creator must have a will, because if it's eternal and brought into existence a finite effect that began, like the universe, he must have chose the universe to come into existence. And a choice indicates a will, and a will indicates it can have a relationship with sentient beings in the universe. Number four, it must be powerful. It created the atom, for example. If you split the atom, ask Professor Karaus what happens. Fifth point, it must be perpetually knowing, because if it's eternal and it established laws like the law of gravity, it implies it's a lawgiver. So therefore we can make the inference that it's perpetually knowing or perpetually intelligent, because it's eternal and created laws in the universe. Finally, it must be one. If we use the rational principle called Occam's razor, and by the way, many people don't understand Occam's razor, and I think Professor Karaus doesn't understand Occam's razor either when I read his book, but he could debate with me later. Occam's razor is not about physical causes, by the way, which has been misconstrued as a straw man in the Kraussian fashion. Basically, Occam's razor is that you must have a simple explanation, but also you must have the most comprehensive, which means what? It actually means that it has to have greater explanatory scope and explanatory power, because it can be complex, because it may deal with most of the questions. But concerning this reality about the oneness of the divine, the argument that the creator must be one is simple and far more comprehensive. If you say 2 or 3 or 4, then it's not simple anymore, and it doesn't answer all the questions. In actual fact, it creates far more questions than it answers, such as, how do 2, 3, 4 causes co-eternally exist? It doesn't make any sense. So I think we've concluded what the Quran concluded 1400 years ago, that there is a creator, he's one, he's unique, and he's transcendent. As the Quran says in the 112th chapter, say, he is God, the one, the unique, God, the eternal, absolute. He begets not, nor is he begotten, and there is nothing like unto him. Now, before I move on to my next argument, I really want to have a nuanced discussion, a very nuanced discussion, which means if someone offers to talk to you, you have to talk to them back. And I wasn't offended, but I found it slightly childish when I asked someone in this room for us to have a chat, and he wouldn't have a chat with me, which I think is not very nice. But that's another story. And I want to do with some contention, so we transcend this kind of what I would call atheist cliches. So what's the first atheist cliche? The first atheist cliche, I call it the Professor Karaus nothing cliche. And if you read his book, you will see that Professor Karaus was a highly acclaimed academic. I mean, I am nothing compared to him. He's right. 1 second. By the way, him making a statement is not an argument. I don't know why you're clapping like someone who's obedient slave. 1 point. Please, I have a time to keep. So, in his book, which I really like his book, I like his style, I like his rhetoric, he wrote in his book, A Universe from Nothing, he said that nothing is nothing with italics. And essentially what he's trying to say, he's trying to change the label nothing, which in the English language is a universal negation. But he's saying nothing is actually something, which is a quantum reality. Now this is quite bizarre. And that's why you have to study philosophy, because you need to make conceptual distinctions. For example, imagine I was in the hallway and I said, I met nobody, and they gave me directions to this room. Or imagine if I said, for example, yesterday my wife made a great lunch, and it was nothing. Nothing tastes great with a bit of whipped cream. I mean, does this make any sense? And Professor Karaus' use of nothing is actually something. He also says in his book, in page 80, our universe will then returning to the quantum haze from which our own existence may have begun. And his own friend, Alexander Vilenkin, said recently, vacuum is very different from nothing. It's a physical object. But this is irrelevant almost, because even Kراوس admits in his book that these are speculative and inconclusive conclusions. Because he says, I stress the word could here, because we may never have enough empirical information to resolve this question unambiguously. So I do respect what he's trying to do, but you would never take an inductive argument over a deductive one. Only someone intellectually challenged would do that, in my humble opinion. The second contention is that things can come into being without any cause. You have a quantum vacuum, a quantum reality, and there are some subatomic events that appear without no causes. I believe we have a strong defeater to this argument, and it concerns perceptions, and it rests on a Kantian argument. Now, I can order my perception in this room. I can see this very handsome young man. I can see the cameraman. I could see the wall. I can also reverse that perception. But if my wife were to start walking down this auditorium, I couldn't help but see her front before I see her back. And I couldn't reverse that perception. Now, the very fact that I know when I can order my perceptions and when I can't, and when I can reverse my perceptions and when I can't, is because we have an innate concept of causal links and causal connections. To reject that based on empiricism or an empirical reality is equivalent and tantamount of actually rejecting the perception itself. It's like shooting yourself in the foot. This is why the philosopher John Cottingham in his book Rationalism said, but on Kant's argument, we will not be able to recognize the event in the first place unless there were a rule that makes it necessary that the order of our perception should be thus and not otherwise. In short, the very experience of an external event already presupposes an understanding of causal necessity. So these are the cliches. Let's go to the next argument, which is the nature of the Quran. Now, the Quranic discourse has been described by Eastern and Western scholars as an intrusive and imposing text, which seeks to intrude into the inner dimensions of man. Now, this imposition is positive as the Quran seeks to positively engage with your intellect and with your psychological disposition. And the way the Quran achieves this is by asking questions. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. And in themselves, do they not see? Talks about the physiological reality, the psychological reality, even referring to things like consciousness. This is why Professor of Philosophy Shabir Akhtar, in his book, The Quran and the Secular Mind, A Philosophy of Islam, he describes what the Quran is trying to say with these verses. He says, nature's flawless harmonies and the delights and liabilities of our human environment, with its diverse and delicate relationships, are invested with religious significance. Created nature is a cryptogram of a reality which transcends it. Nature is a text to be deciphered, evidences accumulating in the material and social worlds and in the horizons jointly point to a hidden immaterial order. And you may think this is quite interesting for a 7th century book, but the Quran goes even further than this. It produces an intellectual challenge for the whole of mankind. The Quran says, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِّثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. And if you are in doubt, talking to Kراوس, talking to me, talking to everybody, if you doubt this book, which we have sent down to our servant, referring to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon whom be peace, then bring one chapter like it and call on your witnesses and supporters besides God, in kuntum sadiqeen, if you're truthful in this claim. Now this verse is a basis for an array of arguments in the Quranic discourse, and we don't have time to talk about all the arguments. Historical argument, sociological argument, and a whole array of intellectual responses. But one I want to talk about is called the inimitability and the uniqueness concerning the Arabic language in the Quranic discourse, which Islamic theologians and thinkers argue that it is a miracle. Now, before I get into that, we have to now discuss what is a miracle. We haven't defined what a miracle is. Now, the word itself linguistically comes from the Latin word miraculum, meaning something wonderful. And the traditional Western philosophical definition of a miracle, as summarized by David Hume in his An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, he says it's a transgression of natural law. We don't agree with that definition. Because what are natural laws? Natural laws are just inductive generalizations of patterns we perceive in the universe. If something changes from the pattern or is different, then maybe it's part of the pattern. It's just based on induction. What the profound Islamic theologians and thinkers have done, they've redefined what a miracle is based on the Quranic discourse. And they have said that a miracle is an event that lies outside the productive capacity of nature, which means when you go to the nature of the event, you exhaust all possible naturalistic explanations. And also, there is no naturalistic causal link between the event and the nature of the event. And this is a far more coherent definition. Let me give an example from the Quran itself. Now, the Quran talks about Moses, Musa, alayhi salam, upon whom be peace, and Pharaoh in the Quran. Moses was told to throw down his wooden staff, and it instantaneously turned into a live snake. Now, this miraculous event, the snake, lies outside the productive capacity of the nature of the event, the wooden staff. Because the chemical makeup of the staff is different to that of the snake. In actual fact, you have to add more stuff to the staff, if that makes sense, stuff to the staff, to be even close of creating a snake, but only the staff was used. So when we exhaust naturalistic explanations, we find there is no causal link between the staff and the snake itself. So this gives us a definition of what a miracle is. Now this applies to the Quran's use of the Arabic language, because the Quran cannot be described as any of the literary forms of the Arabic language, which include saj'a, rhyme prose, mursal, straightforward speech, maqama, a combination of metrical and non-metrical speech, and the al-bihar, the 16 rhythmical patterns of classical Arabic poetry. Now, interestingly, in classical Arabic, every expression falls within the known literary forms of the Arabic language. The Quran, however, de-scopes the Arabic language. And the Quran is a miracle from this perspective, because even though it's made up of the Arabic language, there is no causal link between the Arabic language and the Arabic in the Quran. This is because when we exhaust the 28 letters, the finite grammatical rules, and the finite words, we exhaust them, we cannot produce the unique literary form of the Quranic discourse. And interestingly, from a historical and literary perspective, when attempts have been made to produce the like of the literary form of the Quranic discourse, they have all failed. As the academic Foster Fitzgerald Arbuthnot, a notable British Orientalist, states, and that those several attempts have been made to produce a work equal to it as far as elegant writing is concerned, none have yet succeeded. In this light, brothers, sisters, and friends, what we've just discussed can develop into a deductive argument. And listen very carefully. Number one, a miracle is an event that lies outside the productive capacity of nature. In other words, there are no causal links between the event and the nature of the event. Number two, the Quran's literary form lies outside the productive capacity of the nature of the Arabic language. Its literary form cannot be logically explained using the Arabic language. Therefore, the Quran is a miracle. As Professor Bruce Lawrence from Duke University in his book, The Quran, a Biography, on page number 8 said, as tangible signs, Quranic verses are expressive of inexhaustible truth. They signify meaning, laid within meaning, light upon light, miracle after miracle. So we have two key arguments that are based on deduction, not just induction. And to challenge a deductive argument, you have to challenge the premises, and I hope Professor Karaus would do that. So let's go to some contentions. What about Shakespeare? Shakespeare is unique, but this is a very shallow contention. And I even heard this from Dan Barker in our debate in Minnesota, and he didn't do his reading. Basically, Shakespeare is not unique from the perspective of the structural features of language, the literary form. Rather, it's aesthetic reception. The kind of argument we're talking about, the structural features of the Arabic language. And if you look at Shakespeare, he used the iambic pentameter, the trochaic verse, the blank verse. And many English literateurs use the same kind of structures. And if you go to the book, the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, you will see that Shakespeare has been compared to Francis Beaumont, John Fletcher, and other playwrights. So he's not unique or inimitable from the perspective that we're talking about. Finally, the last contention is, but I'm not an Arab. How would I know? Well, we could use another argument called rational deduction. Now, rational deduction is a thinking process where you take a universally accepted statement and from that draw logical conclusions. And no one would deny universally accepted statements from academia or from authorities that are valid and sound and authentic. Because this is the realm of epistemology, the study of belief, and a valid source of knowledge is actually testimony. If you read the works of Professor Cody and Professor Keith Lehrer in the Epistemology of Testimony published by Oxford, you will see it's a grounded argument which we could discuss later. So the authentic and valid testimony concerning the Quran is, no one has been able to challenge the Quran and produce its literary form. If that is true, then we could draw logical conclusions without even knowing one letter of the Arabic language. We could say, well, could it be from an Arab? Could it be from a non-Arab? Could it be from Muhammad, upon whom be peace? Or is it from the divine reality? We know it couldn't be from an Arab because they all failed, especially the best Arabs at the time. We know it can't be a non-Arab because you have to know Arabic. We know it couldn't be from Muhammad, upon whom be peace, because all human expression, if you have the blueprint, you can replicate it. Just look at some replicas of Picasso and Monet in art. And therefore, it must be from the divine. So from this perspective, we've dealt with some outdated cliches because I really want a nuanced and frank discussion. I really do. And I hope I do have that with Professor Kراوس. I respect him dearly, and I respect all of you. Obviously, we're going to have a pun here and there, but, that's the whole point. I couldn't let Kráوس get away what he did in the beginning. So from that perspective, I really want him to deal with my premises, and I want him to deal with the deductive argument, and I wish him Godspeed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Wحمزة Tezورtسيس, for that expressive presentation on the Islamic worldview. We're now going to be calling upon Professor Lawrence Kráوس to come back on that with his presentation, which I don't think is going to last more than 25 minutes, I'm sure of that. But just to let you know, some of you who perhaps don't know anything about Professor, he's a renowned cosmologist and a science popularizer, and is the foundation professor in the School of Earth and Space Exploration, a director of the Origins Project at the Arizona State University. He's hailed by Scientific America as being a rare public intellectual, and he's also the author of more than 300 scientific papers and 9 publications, books, including the international bestseller, The Physics of Star Trek, and his most recent bestseller entitled A Universe from Nothing, now being translated into 17 languages or more. Professor Kráوس, I call upon you to respond.
Well, first I want to thank the people who invited me, who've been very gracious to me, treated me with more hospitality than I've gotten in many times I've talked. So I guess it's Sabia, who I haven't met, and Obeida, who's been taking care of me for the last day or two, and Isa, who I was just working with. And so I do want to thank them tremendously. They showed me great respect and hospitality, and I want to show them and you that kind of respect. And that doesn't mean I respect ideas. Okay, some ideas are ridiculous, and that's perfectly reasonable. In fact, ridiculing ideas is what makes progress. So if I offend some of you, I don't mean to offend you personally. I may offend some of your ideas, but that doesn't bother me at all. In fact, if you confront my ideas, it will lead to a discussion. What does offend me, of course, is offending personal freedom and equal rights, and that's one of the reasons why I got upset at the beginning of this session. But that's been fixed, and I thank the organizers for that as well. To agreeing to not segregate this room in the 21st century is a great step forward, and I appreciate that. Now, I'm really shocked. First of all I've watched Mr. Tezورtسيس, right? Tezورtسيس. My Greek is pretty good, I think.
Be gorgeous.
Yeah, gorgeous. Well, you are rather gorgeous. Gorgeous George over here. I watched some of these, and they're always exactly the same. So I thought they'd be different this time. And it always begins with you, and I'm supposed to respond to you. And I will, to some extent, but it's hard to respond to nonsense. And in fact, the point of this is not a question, does God exist? That's not the question. It's atheism or Islam or atheism, which is more sensible, I think is what it says, or something like that. Now, I was just shocked because I thought that you wouldn't bother to try and pretend you knew science, because you don't, and we're going to go through that in real detail. Everything you said is nonsense when it comes to science, so we'll go through and we'll have a little chat if that's okay.
Of course.
Okay, good. And so I found it remarkable that you began with that kind of nonsense, and we'll continue from that. But let me just first begin with the fact that the premise of this debate is in some sense inappropriate, because it suggests two things. First of all, it suggests that Islam is something special, and it isn't. It's not special at all. It's one of 1,000 religions or more that have existed since the dawn of humanity, all of which claim divine revelation, all of which claim perfection, all of which proclaim infinite knowledge, uniqueness, beauty, etc. So Islam is just a religion like any other religion. And there's no difference. It proclaims, just as the Rig Veda did and Akhenaten in ancient Egypt, that the universe had a beginning, nothing special. Okay? There's absolutely nothing special. So the question is, Islam as one of 1,000 religions, all of which make the same claims, but mutually inconsistent ones. So one of the things we know is, of these 1,000 religions, they all make mutually inconsistent claims, so they can't all be correct. In fact, at best, one of them can be correct, because they're not consistent with each other. So that means a priori, just a priori, and you like that term instead of a posteriori. I've heard you say that. A priori, Islam has a probability of 0.1% of being correct, because it's just one of 1,000 religions, and one of them at most is correct. But since they all make the same claims, it's probable that none of them are correct. So treating Islam specially is inappropriate. Then atheism is somehow, as has been described, a belief system. It's not a belief system like Islam or Judaism or Christianity or the Norse myths or Zeus or Thor or any of the other myths that have been created throughout human history. All it's saying is, it's not a belief system. It's saying, you know what? We don't choose to believe that stuff because it's not sensible. So it's not saying we believe X. It's saying, well, this myth is inconsistent with this myth, or this myth is inconsistent with what we know about the universe, and therefore, it's unlikely to be true. So what atheism is just saying, this is unlikely to be true. It's not a belief system. So to compare one versus the other is, of course, false. It's a false premise. The first part of the false premise is that Islam is special. Not special at all. It's been there. It'll be gone, or be there as long as other religions. It's just like all the rest. And atheism is not a religion. It's just, in fact, what it is could be described as common sense. Okay, what makes sense? I will think that those things that make sense are likely, and those things that don't make sense are unlikely. In fact, that's what science is all about. Okay, so having said that there's nothing special about Islam, and there certainly isn't. I'm going to talk a little bit about. My intent, by the way, is the other thing I should say is debates. I'm an educator. It's a flaw, but it is what it is. That means I believe in actually trying to illuminate ideas and lead to discussion, critical thinking, and eventually learning things and increase in knowledge. Debates aren't meant for that. Debates are rhetorical devices for people to go out and perform, make statements, and then challenge others and try and convince an audience of something. That's not education. So I will talk a little bit about some of this, and then I just want to have a chat. I'm going to use my 25 minutes to have a little chat. I'll take up my time when I could pontificate, as we've heard, and just ask some questions, because I'd actually like to learn some things. Okay? And hopefully in the process there'll be some education for both of us. So the first thing I want to say, however, I want to clear up some misconceptions. This idea of deductive arguments, which sounds good, is not the way we learn about reality. Okay? Deductive arguments just don't work. They lead to irrational actions. In fact, if we decide what common sense is taking your beliefs to conform to the evidence of reality so that you will make rational actions. If you force your reality to conform to your beliefs, you will make irrational actions. So you can deduce things based on your beliefs, on your a priori beliefs, but you'll have a problem. For example, your a priori belief could be that if you prayed to Allah, that you could jump out the fourth story of this window of this building, and you would land safely. Okay, that could be an a priori belief. And in fact, you could deduce, based on all your beliefs and all of the evidence that you're a good person and Allah would take care of you, or whatever you want to call it, that you'd be fine. I would take the elevator down, and only one of us would be walking at the end. That is not deductive. It's based on empirical evidence. Okay, now, so arguing that something doesn't make sense to you is based on the fact that the assumption that you know what's sensible in advance. But we don't know what's sensible in advance until we explore the world around us. Our common sense derived from the fact that we evolved on the savannah in Africa to avoid lions, not to understand quantum mechanics, for example. As I've often said, common sense, our deductions might suggest that you cannot be in two places at once. That is crazy. But of course, an electron not only can be, but it is. It doesn't make sense because we didn't evolve to know about it. We've learned about it. We force our idea of common sense to change. It's called learning. Some people would rather read an ancient book than learn. And this has been a very good evidence of that. For example, to say something is inconceivable just means you can't conceive it. But the great thing about the universe, and the reason that I do science, is that the universe has a much greater imagination than we do. In fact, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And that's what's wonderful about the universe. Things that are inconceivable happen all the time. And what that does is that expands our mind. And expanding our minds to conform to the evidence of reality is common sense. And that's what, when you call atheism, that's what that is. That's just saying, I'm going to accept the evidence of reality, and if something seems like it contradicts the evidence of reality or is irrational, I should question it. Now, there are a lot of ideas which gorgeous George over here, no, Mr. Tezortseis. I've been to Istanbul and I'm trying to learn Turkish, but Tezortseis, Mr. Tezortseis. It's okay. Do you speak ancient Arabic, by the way?
I could read and do a bit of grammar.
A bit of grammar. You don't speak it then?
No.
So your presumption that it's beautiful ancient Arabic is just a presumption. You actually don't know what you're talking about.
No, it's
okay.
I'll respond
Okay. I just wanted to ask that question because I don't speak Turkish. I wanted to see if you spoke ancient Arabic. Well, I just want to ask, do you speak ancient Arabic?
Yes, I do.
Fluently?
No, but I do speak it.
Okay, but not fluently.
كيف حال?
Well, you know what? There's a real language that you don't speak. It's called the language of mathematics. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about this nonsense about infinity. Let's take something physical. Let's draw a circle and draw a diameter. What's the ratio of the distance of the circle to the diameter? Do you know?
You're the teacher.
Do you know?
You're the teacher.
I know. I'm asking you a question.
No,
I want to have a chat.
I don't know anything.
Well, you've demonstrated that, but you ever heard of pi?
Yes, I have, yeah.
Oh, do you know what it is?
3.1 for Christian.
How many decimals does it have?
I don't remember.
An infinite number.
Yes.
Okay, so the physical distance of the ratio of a diameter of a circle to its circumference is an infinite number.
Yes.
What do you know? Now, when we talk about... Now, what's amazing to me is you quoted Aristotle as the basis of science. Of course, Aristotle was the one that told us objects fall in proportion to their weight because he actually didn't do the experiment. He deduced it based on what he wanted. Galileo, of course, did the experiment, right? And we know, let's do the experiment here in front of you. So I'm going to take this object and this object. Yes. Aristotle would tell me which would fall first. Will you tell me which would fall first? Guess, okay. If you don't know.
The book.
Okay, look, you were right. Great. Okay, good. Why?
Because there's resistance.
Resistance to what?
To the paper, right?
Okay, exactly. Aristotle didn't know that.
Yes, he didn't.
Okay. Aristotle also claimed that infinity was impossible because indeed, as you pointed out, the distance from you to me could be divided into a half, and then a quarter, and then an eighth, and then a 16th, and that's an infinite thing. It makes it impossible.
Yes.
Well, the thing that Aristotle didn't know how to do, and you don't know how to do, is to sum an infinite series. 1 plus a half plus a quarter plus an eighth plus a 16th adds up to 2.
Yes.
Okay, so that kind of argument that infinity is impossible, it just doesn't make sense mathematically. Infinities do occur. Now, it is true in my book that I said infinite density or infinite energy is a concept that appears to be in contradiction with the evidence of physics. But that doesn't apply. All infinities are impossible. In fact, space could be infinitely large. There's no presumption that space isn't infinitely large. It could be. What we now know about physics suggests it probably isn't, but there's no law of physics that says space can't be infinitely large. So this notion that you deduce that infinity is impossible because you don't like it is just not the way the world works. Because infinities happen all the time, whether you like them or not. Not only that, it doesn't lead to irrational actions. Mathematicians have a way of dealing with infinity. We can add infinities. We can take numbers and an infinite series. That, for example, the series 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 to infinity actually has, in mathematical terms, can have a finite sum. It's minus 1/12, if you wanted to know. Okay? It may not seem logical to you. It may seem inconceivable to you that the sum of a series of positive terms, each of which is bigger than 1/12, could end up being minus 1/12. But the fact that it's inconceivable to you just means you're ignorant.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, this idea that Occam's razor suggests, first of all, Occam's razor is not a principle of science. Okay, it's a nice idea that you should try for the simplest answer to any question, and physicists try and use that. Sometimes the simplest answer doesn't work. In genomics, for example, it would be nice if every gene, in fact, you talked about more than one cause for an effect. It would be nice if every disease was caused by a single gene. One of the reasons that genomics is so difficult is we've discovered there's a complex interaction of genes, so that in fact, that there are many separate causes of most diseases. There are very few diseases that have a single cause. But in fact, you know what is simpler than the number 1? The number 0. 0 is a much simpler reason that there's no cause. Okay, so if you really wanted to apply Occam's razor, in fact, you'd apply no causes. Now, you also use the term causality, which is a term I understand. You didn't define it. Do you want to define it?
I may do.
Well, why don't you do it now?
I don't want to give you that favor.
Oh, I thought we were going to have a chat.
Yeah, but I want to have a chat, not a chat. So it's less rhetoric, more connection.
No, let's have a chat. No, I think when we talk about rhetoric, we were talking about the lecture you just gave. I want to have a chat. I'm asking you a question. Do you know what causality means? You use the term.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
if you use a term, you should know what it means.
Yes,
Okay,
I have
but
my
you use
definition. I have my definition.
Okay. Well, I'll define, and that's cause precedes effects. Does that sound good?
No, that's the wrong definition.
Okay. Well, I'd like to learn what it is.
Well, for example, there's an interesting book about the quantum physics and causality, and the philosophers and philosophers of science and scientists have disagreed on a specific definition. So they've reduced back to a fundamental definition. No. Do you want to have a chat a chat?
You quoted a book on physics.
Yeah, I haven't finished yet.
Physicists don't disagree about the definition of causality.
Have you presumed your results here? Do you really want to connect with me as a human being?
No. But
you've asked me a question, you're answering it for me? Come on.
You quoted physicists. Go on.
I said scientists.
Okay.
Now, which is the same, I agree. Now, so from my limited knowledge, and I do believe it is limited, of course, is that the agreement has been on something which produces an effect, which includes, therefore, you can have something called asymmetric spontaneous causality, where the cause exists prior causally, but not prior temporally. So there is a whole range.
What's prior causally, not prior temporally?
Prior causally means that there is I'll give you an example. The Kantian example was you have an infinite ball that's on an infinite pillow. Now, they both, time doesn't exist here, but you're not going to say the indentation is not as a result of the ball. So there is a causal dependency there, and time is out of the window. So we could discuss causality until the cows come home, but it's not as simple as what you're trying to say in terms of that. It doesn't presume temporality, do you see?
Well, I think it does. I think, again, if you think carefully about what you just did,
okay.
The ball doesn't create an indent in a pillow. And by the way, you used infinite. I thought we weren't allowed infinite. But anyway.
It was an example.
Yeah, well, it's an example of a physical example, which you said doesn't exist if it's infinite. But it doesn't matter what's infinite. A pillow here, a finite pillow and a finite ball.
Yes.
Okay? There's an indent.
Of course there is. Yeah.
Okay, was the ball there or not?
Well, my example wasn't based on finitude. It was based on they're both infinite.
Well, but if the ball isn't on the pillow, it doesn't create an indent, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, so it had to be. So was it put on the pillow or not?
Well, that's irrelevant. You're damning the example.
Then
That's a logical fallacy.
No.
Get the point I'm trying to say.
The point is that the physical causes have physical effects. So either the ball is on the pillow or not. Now, the point about causality is that the interesting aspect of it is it's an interesting physical question. But what if there's no before? Let's take, you talked about the cosmology. So let's take general relativity, whose equations I'm sure you don't know. And
I said I don't know anything.
The beginning. You made it very clear that the beginning of the universe is very important. You deduced it, but in fact, deduction doesn't matter. The point is, the universe, our visible universe, did have a beginning because we can measure it. Whether we liked it or not, or whether we think it's sensible or not, it actually did have a beginning, a factor not in dispute. Our universe had a beginning. Now, however, the laws of physics tell us, right now, if we extrapolate back to the beginning, that if we took it at face value, that time didn't exist before t equals 0. So if time doesn't exist at all, the sense of cause doesn't even make sense. And this is the key point. In science, we have to realize that our common sense notions sometimes go out the window. When we observe effects, they have causes. But at the beginning of time, when time itself may have come into existence, then that question becomes a bad question. Philosophers can debate it, people can write it down, but it doesn't matter. Now, the other thing I will say is you've somehow talked to me about the fact that the Quran as a literary document is different than other literary documents. And you've given some arguments that I understand. What I actually did this the other day because I've seen you give this talk a gazillion times. I actually input in a computer a lot of Arabic words and asked them to produce it at random. And I produced 2 sentences from the Arabic from the Quran in 11.6 seconds. My computer speaks neither Arabic nor is Arab, but produced those incredibly divine words. Now, the other question, of course, I would have is, and this is a common sense question, is why did God choose Arabic, or Aramaic, or Greek? I mean, doesn't he speak English? Or the Americans always think he does, which is why they invented the Mormon religion. So the question I want to ask is, what makes sense is to ask not the details of the Quran, which I don't want to dwell on, because it's just one of 1,000 different religions, all of which make the same claims, and all of which, if you look at them a priori, are equally ridiculous from a priori common sense notion. For example, and I got this from my late friend Christopher Hitchens, is it sensible to assume that humans evolved in their present form somewhere between 250,000 to 1 million years ago? So you have a God who creates a universe and has 4.5 billion years of life evolving, and then Homo sapiens evolve and live in incredibly awful conditions and for 250,000 years, and suddenly, in the middle of the desert, in a cave where no one can see it, he takes some poor schmo and says, I'm going to tell you the truth. And not only that, I'm going to allow you to save humanity. And, in fact, if people don't believe you, they're going to go to hell for eternity. And we can talk in great length, in great sadomasochistic length, about the torture they're going to have, and we can all enjoy it. Now, what about all those poor 250,000 years of people, of real people who were struggling to exist and survive, those poor people who were existing before that God decided to give his revelation to Muhammad? Why that? Why would a sensible God wait that long? And of course, the interesting question you have to ask is, why are the revelations always done when no one can see them? If you're asking a court of law, you'd say, well, you know what? It just doesn't make sense. Why don't once it doesn't call down from the sky so everyone can hear them? Why is it always given to people in private who then claim they've had a revelation? Now, why should I believe Muhammad's revelations any more than anyone else's? In fact, there's a young woman in the United States, in my country, who, as you know, had a revelation. You may know this. She had a revelation. God told her to drown her 4 children in a bathtub. And she did. Because God told her. She heard it. She heard it. She had a revelation. It was real. She heard words of incredible harmony and beauty that she'd never experienced before in her life, and she drowned her 4 children. Okay, now she's in a mental hospital for good reason. Because there's no evidence, that a sensible person would believe to suggest that God was telling her to drown the 4 children. Now, let me ask you, do you think Sharia law should be instituted?
Oh, it depends how you define Sharia law. Do you know anything about Sharia law, sir?
Well, I was going to ask you about it.
I will teach you in the next round.
Okay, good. Do you think, for example, that blasphemers should be punished?
Blasphemers meaning?
Maybe if I say, let's just say, and forgive me, let's just say I say that someone who married a 9-year-old girl is a pedophile.
Yeah.
And maybe that person is a prophet. Is that a blasphemer? Is that worth being punished for?
Well, I think you should be educated first and foremost.
No, maybe, I'm not saying it happened. But let's say I said that, I made that claim. Should I be punished?
In a court of law with justice, there will be a form of punishment, yes.
Okay. So what about if I openly questioned the existence of God? In fact, said openly and preached in a room that there's no God. Is that worth punishment?
This is full in our history. We don't have a problem with intellectual debate and dialogue.
Okay.
I even mentioned the 8th century Dahriya.
So if I say that Allah is not God, but Thor is God, and people should worship Thor, and I go and that it's not blasphemous.
Well, it's wrong and it's
Okay.
childish, but I will have a discussion.
But it's blasphemous to suggest. Is it blasphemous to suggest that Muhammad isn't a prophet?
Well, from an Islamic perspective, but you have to understand there's a difference between public intellectual discourse
Okay, so
and
great,
being
okay.
deliberately rude.
Okay, well that's.
But we'll
that's
all
great.
fall for intellectual discourse as per this big debate.
Oh, but you say I should be punished if I suggest Muhammad was a child molester. That's
No, I wasn't saying that.
Didn't you say that?
What I'm saying is, in an Islamic law, for instance, if you were to speak about something like this, and you would be taken to a court under certain conditions,
Then I would be punished.
there may be a punishment. But generally speaking, it would be more edifying and educational.
But should there be punishment? That's what I'm asking you. Should there be?
Oh, you're asking me if there
Yeah.
should be punishment? I think we should follow God's law, of course.
So there should be a punishment.
I think there should be a punishment if you're deliberately harming anyone else.
For openly questioning.
Well, John Stuart Mill
For
had the
openly
same
questioning or
opinion.
Openly ridiculing.
No, there's a difference. Don't straw man my
Okay,
positions.
let me take a more clear example.
You're straw manning my
Say
positions.
you're a homosexual man,
Yes.
and you have sex with another homosexual man. Should that be subject to punishment?
In the private home, it's outside of the Sharia law. If they did it in public, which doesn't even happen where you're from, then there's a different story.
What would Where am I from? Where am I from?
Well, you are from the United States of
Oh, I
America.
see. And so it doesn't even happen in where I'm from. Now that's rude. But in any case,
How's that rude? I thought you're an empiricist.
It does happen where I'm from.
All the stats.
So two people in Arizona are out in the desert having sex because they really get turned on,
Yes.
and they're both men,
Yes.
and they have sex together.
Yes.
Okay? Is that punishable?
If there's no one in the desert, no, it's not.
Okay, let me ask you another question. Is homosexuality wrong?
In the Islamic tradition, it's a sin.
Okay, now here's an idea of why common sense should tell you that Islam, like many other religions, is not common sense. Because, of course, homosexuality is perfectly natural. In all animal species, almost, it's natural. It occurs with a 10% frequency. Okay? In fact, there are good evolutionary reasons for homosexuality. So in that sense, there's no reason and a fundamental... Why would a God who thought it was a sin make it natural among all species? I don't think the sheep, by the way, which 10% of sheep are long-term homosexual relationships. Okay? Why would a God who thought it was a sin create sheep who don't have a soul, who aren't able to think about it, be homosexual? That's the kind of nonsense that we have to ask, and the only way we can determine if it's nonsense is by looking at the world around us, not by deducing it, not by listening to the words of ignorant individuals and Iron Age peasants who didn't even know the Earth orbited the sun. Wisdom and learning comes from observing the world around us, and we shouldn't take our wisdom from people who didn't even understand the way the world worked. Thank you.
Professor Kراوس, thank you very much for your presentation on the atheist worldview.
It's not a worldview.
I think it was actually more like a dialogue, nice to chat between you two guys. Actually, I was wondering when I should jump in and stop you guys. You know. Anyway, I'm sure Aristotle and Plato did the same thing. But now we've got something to sort of come back on from Professor. He's given a lot of food for thought, and no doubt Hamza, in about 10 minutes,
thank you.
Possibly come back and answer some of those contentions brought up by Professor Kراوس.
Thank you very much, Professor Kراوس. Audience,